It's another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. But are you subscribed? If not, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Spread the word about the Christian Reeve Podcast and enjoy this episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Christian Reeve Podcast. Today's guest is a podcaster hailing all the way from Miami, Florida. He is known as Brandon from the Starting Nowhere podcast. Welcome to the show, Brandon. How you doing?
I'm living the dream, man. Thank you very much for having me on this, what here is a bright, sunny morning, but I think it's like midday for you.
It is, but it's also very beautiful here too. I can't complain. It's deceptively sunny. So when you go outside, it's freezing, but it's still beautiful. I don't know. Like, I mean, normally when I'm doing the podcast, especially with American guests, I have to start closing the drapes because by the time we finished, it will be like dark and stuff. But I don't know. It's getting a lot lighter here. Seems to only go dark by about 6 or 7 in the evening now, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, weirdly cold because we had 2 days in sort of the end of March, early April that were like Indian summer, and now back to freezing again. So.
Yeah, the weather, the older I get, the more the weather becomes unpredictable. I feel like when I was younger, I knew what it was going to be outside based upon the month and everything like that. Now, I have no idea. I've only lived here in Miami, Florida for the past 18-ish months, coming up on 2 years here in the next few months. And you can look outside and it's Miami, so it's always beautiful. But then you go outside and you have no idea what it's actually going to feel like based upon wind chill and all these other things. Then so I don't like that. I don't like that part of aging, that I can't predict the weather, and that's annoying to me.
Well, this is interesting because you obviously mentioned off camera that you're originally from Ohio, but yeah, you've moved to Miami. It's 18 months, so you've got a fresh perspective. So if I ask you this question that I normally ask guests,
sure.
you're not going to give me that, oh well, I grew up there, so I hated it kind of speech. Yeah. So what do you think of Miami? What are the good and bad parts about living there? What's it like?
Well, obviously, I've lived in Miami under unique circumstances because, as I said, my timeline is only about 6 months prior to the pandemic and everything kind of shutting down. But if you've watched the news, you may have seen that Miami didn't necessarily shut down in the same way that a lot of places around the world did, which gives you a different perspective. But what I'll say is this: I've lived a handful of places over the course of my life, right? And I'm 35. Miami is easily the most beautiful place I've ever lived. You were talking about from a pure visual perspective, both in the city and just the natural topography, if you will, because I live right next to the water. So I can look out my window right now and there's the ocean. And that's, as a kid from Ohio, as you just said, that's never going to stop being weird to me because that's not what I'm used to at all, right? But as far as living here in Miami, I do think there's a lot of challenges that I don't necessarily enjoy. I don't think the people are the friendliest, nor is the way that people behave here and everything like that's not necessarily something I'm in line with, because I didn't know this before moving here, and I should have, and that's my own naivety, I guess. But Miami's kind of got a Vegas vibe to it almost, and it's all about excess. It's about partying. It's about your outward appearance, and I don't mean like physically. I mean like your car and like the clothes you wear and all these things. It's very superficial in that way, and it comes with some goods and some positives, some negatives to that. But I think overall, I would say that Miami is not a place I would have chosen to live. I'm here because my girlfriend is working on her PhD. And so we had to move here for her to finish up school. So we'll be here for a couple more years, most likely. But there's worse places. There's certainly worse places.
Okay. Yeah. Are you sort of counting down the days though? Are you like, I can't wait to get away from here? Or is it more just like, meh?
I kind of picked up this perspective when I was in the military to try to enjoy places for what they are, not to try to go there and be like, oh, this isn't what I want or this isn't what I'm used to, so I don't enjoy it, right? It's sort of like if you travel. Like I went to London right before we moved here for a couple of days. And I'm not going to go to London and be like, oh, it's not like America, I hate this. No, you go there for what London is, right? And so I'm trying to enjoy Miami for what it is as well. And so there's certain aspects of it that I haven't got to enjoy as much because, like I said, Miami's very much about going out. It's about going to do things, whether it's eating, working out, or whatever. You're always out. Like people don't really cook here. They don't like stay at home very often. So I haven't got to enjoy it for that too much yet. So I'm not counting on the days. I'm counting down the days until we get vaccinated and then we can go out and do a few things or whatever, which coincidentally you hit the jackpot, I guess. Today I get my first dose. So it's a very good day for me.
Oh, well, good luck with that. I've already had my first as well. And, glad to sort of get that out of the way and sort of head towards the direction of normality. Like it's interesting because in the UK we rolled it out quite extensively, and then I noticed that maybe want to say 3 or 4 weeks afterwards, America started doing it. But it's really good. I think it's a really positive thing because, I mean, the UK, you know, it's pretty, it's easier to do it because obviously just naturally the size and you know, distribution, everything like that. But the UK, I mean, the USA, it's vast. Do you know what I mean? It takes a lot longer. So it's obviously that kind of rollout is naturally going to take longer. But it's, you know, it's good to see that you guys are doing that too, and we're getting ever so closer to freedom, or whatever the new normal is going to be. I'm very anxious about that, but at the same time, I don't know. It's better than just perpetually being in a lockdown, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited for what the next phase looks like because my girlfriend is an epidemiologist by trade, so it's been a very useful person to have around during all this, you know, because I don't have to try to filter through the Facebook news or anything like that. I know that I have somebody who exactly knows how these things go and everything. So I think the good thing for us to get the vaccine is that we can actually start to do some stuff. We're not going to go crazy and like do a bunch of stuff like we normally would or everything, but we can like now actually go out to eat if we want to in a certain restaurant that has a certain spacing and all that type of stuff, right? We can start to do some of the things that we've been limiting ourselves on. And again, like I said, right, because she's in a PhD program, so she's been very, very busy. Right before everything started to shut down, like they closed all the businesses, everything, it was one of the first days we actually got to go out and do some stuff because she had started to figure out the pattern of her schooling, and we were able to enjoy ourselves a little bit, like a week before that. And then everything shut down. So now we immediately went back into the house after her being in the house with her face in a book, you know, for 6-7 months and everything. So,
dude, it was the same when I moved here to Manchester. Like, I moved. So I'd been living in Europe for 3 years, and I moved back to the UK in February 2020, if you can believe that. I very briefly went and saw my family in London, and then I moved up here to Manchester. And it was kind of like, to be honest, I didn't have much time to focus on the news because I was like, I need to find a place to live, and I need to find a job, and just panic. So I didn't really, and also I was living in this horrible hostel at the time as well, very briefly. So yeah, my mind wasn't really focused on world, you know, epidemic. And in fairness, it wasn't as prevalent here in the news in the UK as it was everywhere else. It was kind of like, at the time, the Prime Minister wasn't taking it as seriously. It was like, yeah, you know, don't worry about it. And then obviously a month later, it's like, we're shutting this down. So it's, yeah. But anyway, so I'd been out like twice. Still to this day, I've only been out like twice, maybe 3 times max in Manchester. So as far as like nightlife and what it's actually about to live here, I've barely seen anything in an entire year. And the only stuff I've really seen has been through my volunteer work. But that's mostly just delivering and collecting furniture from people and giving out donations and stuff, which isn't, I mean, you sort of see the city from a visual perspective, but you don't see the city living, if you know what I mean. It's like the city, but asleep. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it looks post COVID.
I think what you're seeing right now for a lot of cities, again, Miami notwithstanding, because anybody who's seen the news and saw Miami spring break and everything like that knows Miami is a little bit different than the rest of the world. But I think a lot of the cities, if you saw them right now, it's kind of like going there on a holiday, like a major holiday where everything is kind of closed and people are with their families and everything like that. That's kind of what it feels like right now, because you go to these different cities and you don't get to see the hustle and bustle. You don't get to see what the culture is actually like. You kind of see it in a sleep mode, just like you said.
Absolutely. But you know, I think we are very close to the end of all this. And actually, just changing the subject, but I think it's interesting how we're talking about living in Florida and Miami and living in places like Las Vegas. Like I remember when I visited Las Vegas as part of a brief trip to America, I remember thinking that like I couldn't quite believe that people live in Las Vegas. It's one thing to visit a place, like it's the same with London. You know, people always, especially foreigners, will always be like, wow, London's amazing. Like, for example, I remember there were people that I went to uni with that were European that I told like, oh, I'm no longer living in London. I moved away years and years ago. Like I would never go back. And they're like, why would you leave London? Oh my God, London's amazing. And it's like, yeah, try growing up there and working there and living there. It's a very different story. Like people romanticize living in places, and then the actuality of that situation is very different. And I imagine it's kind of the same with, you know, Miami. Like the world's perspective of Miami is Miami's a city to party. It's great. They based GTA Vice City on Miami. Like, come on, how could you not love it? And then you live there and it's like, it's very different. The day to, because that's the thing, that's what people forget, is that having a week holiday is very different to living like 3 to 5 years in a place. You know, you see everything. You see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And it's up to you to kind of decide what you're happy with and what you're willing to put up with, because no place in the world is perfect. I fail to believe that anywhere in the world is perfect. There'll always be like a kind of a toss up. Like, what are you willing to put up with in your life? Basically.
Well, to your point, it's all about the balance of what you're looking for and what the city has to offer. And then if you go even smaller than that, different cities have small kind of microcosms, if you will, that you can go to a neighborhood and it's very different than the city at large. And if you only stay in that neighborhood, it may be your perfect setting for everything, but then you go like one street over and suddenly it's a whole different vibe. You know, New York City, Boston, a lot of those are a couple of cities I think about here in the United States that are like that, where they have different neighborhoods that are completely different, and that can give you a lot of different feel for it. And I would say Miami is even similar to that somewhat, because if you think about when people think about Miami, the number one thing that they say or they think about is South Beach, right? You know, they think about the Miami Beach area, which is out 20, 30 minutes from where I am. And it's completely different. But the only time I even get a Miami South Beach type vibe is from people who, there's a hotel across the street from me. It's people who are staying there to go to South Beach. And so they're already in pre-party mode, and they're like in bikinis or swim trunks or whatever, and they're getting ready to go do that. So what I tell people when you think about living in a place like Miami, Vegas, London, anywhere you're going, is think about what you were for that week that you were in that place you came and visited. And now imagine a never-ending supply of people who are all coming with that energy, and you're just trying to go to work. You're just trying to go get your coffee or something like that. And they're stopping and looking at buildings, or they're drunk at 2 p.m., whatever that vibe for that city is. That's what it's like to live there, dealing with those people.
When I was about 18, 19, 20, 18, 19, 20, 21. So about 3 years, I was working in the supermarket. And sorry to my listeners, I know I've spoken about this a million times, but this is a new story that they've probably never heard. So basically, I would often, there was a really nice part of London called Chiswick, which is basically like average house price is like 5 million, and loads of celebrities live there. And I worked in this, you know, it's a high-end supermarket, but it's still a supermarket. And I was not liking life. I was not happy. This was pre-university, pre-anything. I felt like I just, pardon my language, like, well, no, I'll keep it PG. Throw my life away, basically. Yeah. So I was not feeling great about myself. And basically, I remember distinctly that there was this bridge that I would cross over. It's like a tiny little bridge that was right next to the train station before I got to the high street. And I would often travel in the morning, and particularly in the summer when it was like bright and early in the morning, but it's like 5 a.m. And I... This would often happen, but I remember there was this one time where there was this really drunk woman, like off her face. And literally, it was like changing of the guard. Like I'm like walking over, listening to music in kind of, because this is the thing, like I hated that job so much that I had my headphones in, blasting metal music, trying to kind of psych myself up for just everything that I'm going to have to deal with. Horrible managers, horrible customers, you name it, right? So I'm just psyching myself up and getting ready for this, right? And she's coming over and she's like, oh my God. And she literally says this on the phone, and it just crushed me because it would literally epitomized everything that I was feeling at the time. She's like, oh yeah, you know, I'm so hammered and I'm walking over this bridge right now, and all the sad losers are going on their way to the job, and I'm coming back from this party, and I'm just like, I am one of those sad losers. It's just
that is almost poetic in the sense that I could see that as a movie scene, right? Because if you're the main character in this movie and you're feeling that, and that the camera angle, everything's showing that, where you're just down on that day, and then you get this extra who walks by and she's just in that mode. I could feel that like viscerally. That's incredible.
You know, it's funny. In more recent years, I've been told that I'm a really good storyteller, right? And I think that I'm stuck, because I don't like to give myself compliments. I think that's kind of lame and douchey. I like to remain humble and modest and stuff. But I do think it's important to recognize your growth when you're getting better at something. Yeah. And one thing I think over the past 2 years is I have got better at telling stories. And also because I've started doing this, I've got like a series, for instance, on my YouTube channel, which is literally, it's It's called Story Time, and I tell stories from my life. And then I started thinking, like, every time I get in a situation where I interview someone like yourself, or I do a live stream or whatever, you know, the memory works in a funny way. Things jog your memory and suddenly stories come out. Like right there, I've never told that story before. It just was jigged by that particular thing that you mentioned. And I kid you not, sometimes I look at certain things that have happened in my life and I do think, like, this would make an interesting movie. I think you could do a movie out of it, because some crazy stuff has happened in my life. And I suppose the interesting thing is that, like, most people have had interest in lives. It's rare that someone has had a boring life. It's just that you might not be able to articulate that or put that into words, or maybe you're not a great storyteller or whatever. But I think everyone has something, or some entertaining stuff they've seen or done or experienced or whatever. But it's all about, trying to kind of tell that in an interesting way. Like sometimes I'll do a video about something where I think, oh, this isn't really that interesting, but you know, I need to put a video out, I need to continue this series. And then people find it interesting. And I'm like, man, like at the time, it really didn't seem like a big deal. But then that's another interesting element to it, isn't it? Is your individual perception of the event. Like you might think, oh, that's perfectly normal. Oh, whatever. That's just, you know, every day. And another person would be like, wow, oh my God, that's huge, you know.
I think you said two things in there that are kind of something that I always think about when it comes to just the one is that people are far more interesting than we give ourselves credit for, right? Now, we all know somebody who thinks they're way more interesting than they actually are.
Yes.
And I'm not talking about those individuals, but...
Yeah, no, that's the interesting thing. Those people that think they're better than they actually are boring people.
Yeah.
Because when they tell their story, you know that most of their story is a lie. So they might be like, oh yeah, I went to this bar and it was amazing. I had like 15 women around me. It was great. And it's like, no, what happened is probably one girl smirked at him.
Yeah, exactly.
He just expanded that into some big lie, a web of lies.
So anyway, I do think that people's lives are far more interesting than we think they are. And then the second part is what you were talking about too, is that because we've lived our own lives, they don't see that exceptional to us sometimes, because we just do something and they're like, oh yeah, this happened, you know, it's part of my experience. I can't really sensationalize it because I went through it. But then you tell somebody else, you're like, wait, what happened? Like, how did that go down? Like, you need to tell me everything, because that's the most incredible thing I've ever heard. You're like, oh, that was just a Tuesday for me. It's like, and it's not because, again, it's not because you're trying to act like I'm just so great, these things happen to me all the time. It's just because when you're actually experiencing something, your brain doesn't necessarily click over into that movie mode where you're watching yourself. So you just experience it and you're trying to deal with it in real time. And then somewhere down the line, you may be like, that's crazy. I just, you know, met Holly Berry or something like that, whatever the thing is for you, you know?
You know, the only times in my life that have been surreal, like a movie moment, there's two specific things that happen, like that have happened a lot, right? One is when you go to like an amazing place. Like I felt that way when I was in the Nevada desert, for instance. I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is exactly like the movies. Yeah, I can even remember like the feeling of being there and how quiet the wind was and all of that. You know, I can feel that, right? And then the other thing is when people are so unbelievably rude to you that you're gobsmacked and you don't know what to say. And you're like, did you just really say that? Like, I can kid you not, like the amount of customers I dealt with over the years, or rude people in general that would belittle me, stuff that happened at school. I remember just looking back at that and being like, wow, damn, I can't believe someone said that to me. I can't believe they had the balls to say that to me. Like, you know, you had the audacity to say that. But yeah, it's like you say, it's individual perception. It's your tolerance meter, I suppose. Yeah, sometimes when I talk to people about my upbringing or things that happened in my teens and stuff, people are like, oh, that's not normal. That's a bit. I'm like, huh.
That's a fun face to see, by the way, because I've done that where you're telling something that seems normal to you and you see somebody's face start to change. You're like, uh-oh, I'm saying something that is very uncommon and they are reacting to it. Like, I thought this was normal. It's like, I don't know where my line is here. I've got to really watch this.
That's where I try to backtrack and you'd be like, oh yeah, but you know, it's fine. Yeah. Like there was like, I love you, Mum. But there were some things that my mum did that were a bit, let's say, over the top, bit over extreme strict. And I would tell friends growing up and they'd be like, the whole time just staring like, what?
Yeah.
And I'd be like, then I'd start backtracking and be like, oh yeah, but you know, it's fine. She's great. Love her to bits. You know, we go on like a house on fire. Let's move on.
I love those moments. Those are fun. Those are really fun, but you have to have the right group of friends too, because some people are so I don't want to say conservative necessarily, but they're just very limited in their experience and their view of how the world should be. And so when you start to tell them stories like that, you completely change in their mind of who you are and your life and your upbringing, and they judge you based upon that. I think you just got to make sure you have the right people around you who can be that open, who understand that sometimes crazy stuff happens in life, you know?
Yeah, I avoid people like that, like the plague. I'm sorry, but like life isn't about the things that happen to you. It's about how you react to things.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like you can have, like some of the people I've met over the years have had like the craziest, most depressing, crazy like life stories, but they're just the most chill, relaxed, awesome people you'd ever meet. And then there's other people that have had an easy upbringing and yet they complain perpetually about everything and everything's terrible and they're negative about everything and blah 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 blah. And it's like, well, I think it really comes down to like what I pay attention to now is how people treat other people, if they show respect. Like, for instance, I mean, this isn't really that important in the grand scheme of things, but it'll give you an example of what I mean. So like when someone like interrupts me when I'm speaking, that really like annoys me. Like it shouldn't annoy me that much because it does happen fairly often, and usually what it means is that person has no interest in hearing what you have to say. They just want to be heard, because there's lots of people like that are just egotists and they just want to get what they want to, because they're just missing the point. Like every time you speak to someone, it's an opportunity to learn from them and grow and see someone's perspective on the world. And do you know what I mean? Like, and like every time you speak, you're just repeating stuff you already know, so you're not gaining anything. Like that's why I always prefer to listen rather than speak. But like when I meet those people where, okay, scenario, let's say you ask me a question and I start and begin to give my response. Now, okay, some people might say, Christian, you need to just get to the point. You take too long. Well, you know, the English is a very expressive language. English is not, it can be A to B, but normally it's A to F and then back to B again. And because, you know, sometimes you need to give people context for things. You can't just say something straight. You need to kind of build it up a bit. And, you know, I like to tell stories as well. And since I tend to save, like I don't talk often, like I don't instigate conversations, stuff like that. If I do speak, you know, I kind of get into the swing of things. But when someone does that and they interrupt when I've just begun speaking, I get two things happen. I get really aggressively angry, because I'm not an angry person, but I just want to punch them. I'm like, and then the other part of me is just like confused. Like, well, why would you ask me this question if you're not interested in hearing what I have to say? What is the point of that? Like, I don't understand. Are you just going through the motions? Is this just like, okay, I asked them a question, therefore we can move on now? Like, what? I don't understand that. It drives me nuts.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of weirdness to people's idiosyncrasies when it comes to speaking, especially like what you're talking about there, where they're just going through the motions so they can get to their point. So like, for example, say I had a story about, I don't know, beach ball or something like that, right? And I'm going to naturally start to lean the conversation that way for no reason. I'll just be like, oh, have you ever seen this movie that has this giant beach ball in it? And I'll just start so I can get to my story. And I see people do stuff like that all the time. I'm only asking you about this specific thing so I can tell you about my thing. It's got nothing to do with you hearing your actual answer. And you may even say something that's like, a cry for help in there, but I'm not listening. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to pay attention. I'm just waiting to get to my thing. You know what I mean? So it's a bad habit we have.
That's never happened to me, but I've seen that happen. Like when you're, you know, like when you're a spectator in someone else's conversation, you're just kind of listening. Yeah. And yeah, I've seen that happen. And it annoys me because you want to hear what that person has to say because they got like an interesting story. But then that other person keeps trying to bring it back to the dumb thing. And you're like, look, you want to say like, none of us care about your dumb story about, I don't know, what happened to you at the supermarket and why you're annoyed about it and screw all retail worker. I don't know, whatever. Like no one cares about your story, right? We want to hear what this person has to say. You know, shut up. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, it drives me nuts, but it is what it is. Anyway, let's bring it back to you. So you are the host of the Starting Nowhere podcast, which is what we mentioned in the beginning. Tell us about who the podcast is for and the types of topics you tend to discuss on the show.
Absolutely. So as cliche as it is, I think that there's episodes out there for just about anybody. I know that they're going to lean towards some of my interests, obviously, but I try to just talk to anybody about anything. But the podcast is set around the idea of having open conversations about things that we've traditionally been told we're not supposed to talk about, and doing it in a way where I'm not trying to browbeat my guest into whatever my perspective is, and I don't expect them to browbeat me into their perspective. It's to express our perspective. When there's conflict, naturally, you express it and you go through it and you work through it and those type of things as well. But also just to talk about things that are interesting. Because like you said before, I think people are far more interesting than we give ourselves credit for. And I also think that there's a lot of stuff that is just really dynamic in the way that we learn, in the sense that I can hear somebody say something on a podcast one time, and it's a throwaway comment for them, and then it sparks a whole train of events for me because of where it leads me, right? And so it's just really conversations at the end of the day. It's conversations with people who either have an interesting topic to talk about, or have done something interesting has happened to them, or we just get into some debates and just express ourselves in a lot of different ways. One of the episodes I'm the most proud of, I had a police officer on who we talked. It was a day after the Capitol riots here in the United States happened. And so we didn't have a lot of facts at the time. And I was really wrong on a lot of stuff that I thought at the time, which is great to see, in the past now. But I got his perspective on what he may have thought of happened from a policing perspective, why this happened and all these different types of things. And then later the facts come out and you see how right he was, how wrong I was, and all this type of stuff. And then also we talked about some of the, race related shootings that have happened here in the United States that have been very big news and everything going on around the world. And so it was just a really good episode, I felt like, because we got to dive into a lot of that and have some real conversations, especially, like I said, from somebody who has a very in-depth perspective of what policing is actually like. So it's not just two lay people shouting things they've read from their biased news sources at each other and everything. So but that's the long and short of the show. It's just a lot of different conversations about a lot of different stuff. And some of it may be boring to people, but I think it's either interesting or useful. So for example, I just had a tax expert on a couple of weeks ago to talk about different tax issues and everything as we get ready here in the United States to file our taxes and stuff. And I think that's useful information for people, even though they don't want to hear it.
And what are your sort of podcasting goals? What are the main things you want to achieve with this podcast?
That's a great question that I haven't really put a lot of deep thought into. I think it's still in the stages for me where it's trying to inspire conversation and thoughts, and hopeful that people will look with either their own beliefs or in the way that they deal with other people's beliefs. And what I mean by that is either challenging your own belief. One of the things I think is very important is to never be set in your own ways. I like to have my thoughts challenged consistently because I know that I have biases. And so if I don't have them challenged, then I'm just going to believe whatever I believe from the beginning, and I'm not getting any better as a human being, right? And then secondary to that, I also think that by somebody seeing two people having a conversation where there is conflict naturally and they're not going at each other's throats and they're able to still be meaningful in that conversation, hopefully will help other people have that in smaller instances, because I think that's what causes a lot of the issues we've seen in today's world, is that we've spent so long in our history as human beings just avoiding talking about things. And so they never got better. We're not any better today, I think, than we were 30 years ago, say, about talking about race, politics, religion, money. We're still bad at them because we just kept avoiding it. And we didn't develop the skills to be better at these things.
Let's move the conversation forward. Obviously, you mentioned quite a few times that you've been in the military. So from what I have in my notes here, you were involved in the military as a non-combat officer in the Air Force for 10 years. So what exactly did you do during this time? Talk to us a little bit about your military career.
Sure, absolutely. So I want to start with just making sure people understand. I joined the military for what I believe is the most common people join the military, and it's not talked about as often as it should be, is because I was poor. I had no future opportunities. I didn't know what I was doing with my life, and the military provided a structure. It provided a way to go to school. It provided all these different things, right? So I wasn't somebody who was like, I got to serve my country and do all these super things. Now, did I become proud of that as I was in the service? Absolutely. But that's not why I joined. And that's not why most people join. So I joined when I was just about to turn 20. I tried to make it on my own for 2 years after high school. I had dropped out of college. I had some student loan debt, like just some very traditional screw up stuff, if you will. The same thing you said you were doing with your life when you were working at the supermarket. That's where I was, right? So I joined when I was about to turn 20, and I went to, my recruiter lied to me. I went to basic training thinking I was going to do one job, but I wasn't qualified for that job because of my student loan debt. I couldn't get a top secret clearance. So I had to pick a new job.
Back up. Your student loan affected your military. I don't understand.
So when you're going to get a top secret clearance, which is what I needed for the job I was trying to get, they look at your debt history, your credit history. And if you have outstanding debts that you haven't paid on, which I didn't have a job and stuff like that, so I wasn't able to pay on some of these things, so they were delinquent, they disqualify you. You can't, they consider you a threat to take a bribe from like a foreign country or something like that and to sell out secrets of the United States, which is stupid.
Well, because they think that maybe because you're in a compromised situation with your debts that may... Oh my God.
So, but to make it even dumber, the job that I signed up for had a $10,000 sign-on bonus. My combined debt was like $5,000.
Could you imagine? Oh, I'm gonna sell secrets to the Saudis so I can pay off my student loan. Like what?
And again, now let me be clear. If you're a lawyer, that sounds a lot different because that's like $300,000 in student loan debt. That makes a lot more sense. I had $5,000 of unpaid debt or something like that. It was like super low.
Nothing.
And I'm like, so yeah, but so I couldn't no longer get that job. And when I was in basic training, they're like, hey, you've got to pick a new job, and we're gonna give you like 20 minutes because they wouldn't let me out of my contract because they felt like I lied on the contract, which by all technical rules I did. But I did so because my recruiter told me to. Well, let me say it this way. She was very smart. She didn't tell me to. All she said was like, look, if you say no to some of these things or say yes to some of these things, you can't get this job. And it like didn't literally wink, but there was heavy wink energy in the air, if you will, right? So anyways, so I ended up going through all that and having to pick a new job. And one thing I learned about myself when I was in basic training is that sleep deprivation gets to me and makes me very emotional. Basic training in general is a very high stress situation because there's a lot of yelling. You don't know what's going on. You're worried about a ton of things, but, so anyways, I was very emotional, and they give you like 20 minutes to pick a job. And I'm like, I have a friend who I know who also joined the Navy recently, who's going to this base to do a job in this area. So I'm going to go there. That was like 90% of my thinking. It was a non-combat position. It was going to go somewhere where I knew somebody, and like, I'm going to do that. And so I picked graphic arts, did that for like a year and a half, and then they deleted it. So then I just didn't have a job for a period of like 2 years. I kind of just did odds and ends for other people. Was really depressed, got super overweight, was like smoking, was just not in a good place at all mentally. Because I, again, felt like I didn't have a future, didn't know what I was doing with my life and everything. And then eventually I cross-trained, which is picking a new job, a new career field, and you're going to go back to school in the military for that job and everything, for what's called contracting, which is a very good field in my opinion, because it had a lot of crossover to the private sector, the civilian sector. And so then I cross-trained into that, re-enlisted, did that for 4 to 5 years. Throughout my military service, by the way, I did 2 tours to Qatar, which whenever I talk about Vegas, it always reminds me of Qatar, because Qatar is like the same thing. Because are you familiar with Doha? Not that you've been there necessarily, but yeah. No. So Doha, Qatar is a massive like skyscraper city. Qataris in general are very, very wealthy. They have a ton of money,
it's like
right?
Dubai 2.0, basically.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they're trying to compete with. They're trying to compete with UAE and everything like that. So when you're in Qatar, it's exactly like Vegas. It's desert, skyscrapers, lights, all this city and stuff like that. And it's really disorienting because you're like, none of this is supposed to be here. It's really weird. But anyway, so I did 2 tours to Qatar while I was in non-combat deployments. And I cross-trained into contracting and ended up doing that for about 5 years, with my last year being in 2015. Where I went to Qatar from January to August of that year. So I was deployed for about 7 months of that year, came back, and then got out, finished my bachelor's degree while I was in the service. I've since completed my master's degree as well, all paid for by the United States government. So
oh, wow.
No student loan debt for me now. But altogether, I did just shy of 11 years in the United States Air Force. So
wow. You mentioned like some of the difficult times you had, but what would you say are kind of like the worst moments that you had during your service, like overall during that time? Because 11 years is a long time.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely say that the kind of that time that I was talking about there. So when I got my job deleted and I didn't know what I was doing, I also happened to put on the highest rank that I was ever going to get in the service, which was staff sergeant, right? So I got the role, I got the first leadership position that I could have had in the military. And then since I didn't have a job and then I had really young officers leading me, they made me an errand boy. So I did all this work to get this higher ranking position, studied for it, passed the test, did all this stuff or whatever. And then now I'm back to like the lowest rank I've ever been, basically in my day-to-day operations and how I'm working, everything like that. So I just felt like I had no forward momentum, didn't know what I was doing. And so, like I said, I was just doing a lot of things that weren't healthy for myself. I also was behaving poorly. I got in some trouble, not like major trouble or anything like that, but some trouble here and there with stuff. And I just did things that I'm not proud of. So I'd say that's probably my darkest time for the military, because outside of that, the military is, in some ways, it's what you make it. And there's a lot of opportunity there. And it's cool that you get to meet so many people from all around the world. You get to travel. I like I said, that was the first time I'd ever left the country, was to go to Qatar. And so on the way to Qatar, we stopped in Germany, we stopped in Italy and stuff like that. And then you're in Qatar, and then I'm meeting people from Nigeria, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, just all over the world, right? And so I overall look at my military service as very positive because of the experiences I got to do. But that period of time, which is probably about 18 months or 2 years, was bad, and could have ended it with me getting in a lot of trouble, depending on what I would have gotten into, or what I would have gotten caught doing and stuff like that. So I'm just thankful that that didn't happen to me. But at the same time, I'd say that was my darkest period.
Was this like drugs or something?
No, just like we'd go to a bar and then I would drive home or something like that. You know what I mean?
Oh,
so
wow.
Putting myself at danger and putting others at danger. I'm
okay,
could have gotten in trouble with that. So
to frame this more, it was more like, because your mindset is like frustration, like you say, like this is where you're at as far as your rank, but then this is how you're being treated and stuff. So it's more kind of like frustration and not knowing what to do. And then obviously when that happens, you get lackluster. I mean, I've experienced something similar. I've had jobs where, like I remember one job I had, I'd been promoted, and towards the end of that role, before I quit the job, like I literally was doing nothing, because I'd done all my work, and like they weren't giving me any new work, and they were just waiting for me to leave. And I just never felt more useless in my entire life. Like I was blown away. I was like, they're still paying me to do nothing. I don't like, why not just let me go now? I don't understand this at all.
And you add in with the military too. The military is not just a job, it's your entire life in a lot of ways, because I was stationed in the middle of nowhere, basically Georgia, a very small town in southern Georgia, where there's not a lot to do. I don't really have, I don't know many of the people here, and so it's like, you never get away from it. Like if I had a bad job here now in like, say, Miami or somewhere like stuff like that, I have mobility. I can choose what I'm doing. I can quit. I can go do it. Like with the military, none of those are options. You're locked in. You can't, if I try to leave the military, I'm AWOL. I'm now I'm committing federal crimes. I'm going to get dishonorably discharged, which will ruin my life and like all these type of things. I'm going to go to jail probably, right? So like, it's just a very imposing feeling. And what I had there was obviously depression. That's why I was taking risky behavior. That's why I was doing all these stupid things and everything. I was depressed. I was heavily depressed. And, back then I wasn't as aware as an adult as I am now. And so I couldn't diagnose myself. I couldn't go get the help that I should have gotten, that I could have needed. And I couldn't find positive outlets for that energy and everything like that. So that's why you see that risk behavior. That's why you see me doing stupid stuff. So I can look back and say I was very depressed during those times, and definitely should have gotten some counseling, and definitely should have gotten some help. And I just got lucky more than anything that I didn't ruin somebody else's life or my own. That's really all it was luck.
Well, thanks for sharing. Now let's switch the vibe. All the best moments of your military service.
Oh man, the best moments. That was a lot. So this is going to sound, the first one, I'll start with a nerdy one, because it's just, for me, it was good. It's I got to work on what they call a protest in the military while I was in Qatar, because they trusted in me. And so what that is essentially the military awards contracts based upon certain criteria that we put out, and we get bids and everybody gets to compete. And the people who lose those contracts have a big weapon they can use called a protest, where they essentially send a request to the General Services Administration in the United States, which is in DC. It's like, congressional level type thing, to review what happened and see if we did our job properly. And so you don't get to do those very often in the States, and you really don't get to be involved in them at my rank that I was and everything. But because we were deployed and I knew more about the career field than a lot of the other people did, and they were like, hey, could you help with this? And so, I'm at work for like 10, 12 hours a day, just like reading hundreds of pages of documents that I had nothing to do with, trying to figure out the logic chain and why this happened, when did this do. And so that was a really cool experience for me, just because it was really affirming in my career. But also I'd say getting to travel to Qatar was obviously really, really cool for me, because I landed in Qatar on the day that President Obama was elected the first time.
Oh, wow.
So like, that's how we'd been traveling for 36 hours at that point, I think. And I hadn't slept the whole way. And so I was so tired when we landed. The election wasn't over, and we didn't know if he was going to win or if John McCain was going to win, right? And so I was like, I can't stay awake anymore. I've got to go to sleep and everything. So that was really, really fun. I actually got to shake President Obama's hand too while I was active duty. So that was a cool experience as well. But just in general, like I said, man, just building a path for myself, I think, was the biggest part of my career, and seeing that people believed in me and that I was worthwhile. A worthwhile member of society and could contribute to things and had a future for myself was probably the overall best part about the military, is being entrusted with a lot of responsibility and showing that I could actually do those things.
You mentioned before how, you were lucky enough to sort of have like your schooling paid for in the military. And to be fair, like I've seen a lot of advertisements, both here in the UK and in the US, about the benefits of joining the military, but lay it out for us, especially as a veteran. What are the benefits, while you're in the military and also coming out of the military? Like, are you kind of set for life? Like, we do also hear a lot of negatives about how veterans are treated, especially in the States. So like, paint us a map of what that looks like.
So I'll start with the negatives and flip back to the positive, just because I do think that they are very situational. So the negative side of it is that the military puts people in situations that you are not supposed to be in. Now, to be fair, this is true of combat going back again to the medieval times and before that, right? Human beings are not meant to see these traumatic things and just be okay with that. You're not meant to see kids die or your friend get shot and die and stuff like that. Like, that's not normal experiences that humans are meant to deal with. So the biggest negative I see, for not myself, but for a lot of the veterans that I know and from, people in my family even, is that they don't take care of them when they get back. If you went and did something like I did, which is a skill that translates into the private sector, you're golden. You're amazing. People love you. You're going to get a lot of opportunities, right? But if you killed people for the military, what's your future like? You have no future prospects when you get back here to the country, unless it's going to involve going back and doing that again in a private company. And as well as, they don't give you mental health support. The VA is terrible for taking care of the injuries that you sustained while in combat and stuff like that. So for the most important people, I would say, in the military, which is your combat fighters, they do not take care of them at all. They do not support them in meaningful ways that they should. But
just to add to that, I'm kind of stunned to see like how many veterans from the States end up like homeless and stuff like that. That blows my mind. It's like, how, especially since the States has always been like very proud of its veterans. It's always like, that's really something that's always pushed. That surprises me to see that. Like, how does that even happen? I mean, obviously, like, I know, as you said, like, if you're just in the straight Marine Corps, then you don't have translatable skills. But isn't it sort of the military's kind of responsibility to make sure that you have something coming out of the military?
You would think so, but they don't treat it that way. And what you'll see if you go and you look at most of the homeless veterans, is mental health issues, which is something the military has started to get better at, but it's still absolutely dreadful at, right? And so you're talking about, again, you put these people in these traumatic incidences, because let's talk about it this way. Take out combat for 1 second, right? As I said before, the military is your entire life. That's an inordinate amount of stress to put on people. Imagine if you went to a day job that would require you to be on call all the time, no matter what, and then at any given moment could send you anywhere around the world where you might get killed, or just tell you, know what, we don't want you at your current location anymore. You move across the world, country, to somewhere where nobody, the weather's terrible, there's no redeemable quality of this place. And then not only that, if you get mad at your job and you cuss out your boss, you're gonna get fired, right? Or reprimanded or something like that. You can potentially go to jail for cussing out your boss. You can get put into what they call CC, which is a punishment where you have to like go and like dig a giant hole, bury a trash can, dig a trash can back up, and then clean it and polish it, right? Just like it's meant to be punishment, where you can't leave base at all and stuff like that. Like, they have all these restrictions they can do.
Wow.
That's realistically can happen to you. Yes, those are more extreme examples of it, but what I'm saying is you never get away from that. Now add in the combat stress. And then you come out and, like you said, you have no transferable skills. You have these mental health issues and nobody's helping you for it and everything like that. Yeah, it's not only probable that you're going to end up homeless. It's going to be a lot of those people who do have mental health issues that they just simply didn't get diagnosed because they can't hold down a job. They can't do any of the stuff we're talking about, right? So that's, I say, why some of the most important people in the military are treated the worst. But then you got people like myself or people in general who are like, say, the general workforce. A lot of those skills do translate to the private sector. And even if they don't, you can get out and go to school full time, and the military will pay you to go to school because of the GI Bill. You literally earn a salary while going to school. So you don't necessarily have to work, which is good for a lot of people, right? But what you'll see is that most people in the military don't take advantage of the GI Bill or what's called TA, tuition assistance. While you're active duty, they'll pay for school as well, up to like $4,500 a year or something like that, I think it is.
Wow.
And so but most of the force doesn't use it. They don't end up getting their degree. I have a ton of my friends who I'm like, dude, if you just get your degree, there's so many jobs that'll pay you well, stuff, but you have to get your degree. And they're like, I don't want to go to school. And so they don't. And so they squander those resources that they're given. And I'm not putting that on the military. That's obviously the members themselves. You have these options. You're just not taking advantage of it. But the biggest benefits I would say of the military is it's what I call the greatest starter kit for adulthood that you're ever going to get. If you're an 18 or 19-year-old kid who's never really taken care of themselves, you go to the military, they're going to teach you how. They're going to teach you to show up on time. They're going to teach you to dress yourself well. They're going to give you all the things that you want without you having to go through like years of being bad at it, right? And they give you a skill and they teach you how to be responsible, and then they pay for school. Like, it's a great starter kit for adulthood if you actually utilize it in a meaningful way, right? So I think that's one of the biggest benefits that people don't take advantage of. But then outside of that, for United States military, at least, again, as I said before, and I keep saying, it pays for school. And I've gotten 4 degrees now that all been paid for the military. I have no student loan debt anymore, obviously, from that.
Wow.
And they paid for everything. Also, a really, really powerful tool is what's called the VA loan for getting real estate, for buying a house for yourself. I bought my first property back in 2016, $0 down, without paying any kind of private mortgage insurance or anything like that. And the VA takes care of you. That's a really, really good loan. It's the most powerful tool for buying real estate that you could have. Now, you have to live in it. You can't use it for investments straight away, but it's a very, very powerful tool. And then you have a lot of, depending on who you are, you can get healthcare for life and everything like that too. There's not a lot of jobs in this world anymore where you can work 20 years and then get retirement, healthcare, and paycheck every month for the rest of your life. So theoretically, if I had done that, I would have retired at 39 or right around 40, right? And I would have gotten a paycheck and healthcare for the rest of my life if I had chose to stay in. I mean, that's a huge benefit for some people. For me, I didn't feel it was worth it. And the reason for that is because I can make more money on the outside, and that retirement's $2,000 to $3,000 a month, which is not nothing, but it's not enough for me to sacrifice another decade of my life doing something I don't believe in anymore and being sent everywhere and all that type of stuff, right? So I look back on my military time very positively, but I am also realistic in the sense that there was a divergence in what I needed and what the military needed. And I wasn't the person the military needed anymore. And because it had given me so much, I didn't want to disrespect it by taking up a spot that could be used for somebody else. And being honest, I just wanted more for myself that I could control. Not that the military doesn't provide a ton of options, because it does, but I was getting ready to get sent who knows where. You know what I mean? I could have been sent to North Dakota or possibly California, maybe a good spot. You never know. And that kind of non-control was bad for me. And I had built a life for myself in Tampa, where I was at the time. I had friends there. I had a house. I had all these things going for me. I was like, I don't want to just have this taken away from me just because the government decides they need me somewhere else. And like, this is no longer a path for me. So
one final question about the military. Yes. I just want to know, what are the main differences between the US military and then maybe some of the other militaries around the world that you've encountered?
Having been at Qatar, where there are the British forces, or the RAF is there, and then also the Aussies were there as well, and stuff like that. Our short length is one of them for sure. The Brits and the Aussies wear way shorter shorts than the U.S. military wears.
Okay,
but no. I think what's really weird is the U.S. military is a lot more constricted on what we're allowed to do. So the Australians and the British forces that were there. I think there was Italian there as well. They're allowed to drink. We weren't allowed to drink.
Interesting.
They were allowed. Yeah, they were allowed to do a lot more. So it's interesting that their forces are actually a lot more. They expect a lot more out of them. They're a lot harder on them in some senses, but then they also allow them a lot more freedom. They trust their people a lot more. So I think that's one of the big things that you see there. We're a lot more restrictive in the way that we treat each other while we're in the military for the United States compared to the other forces that I've seen.
Why do you think? I mean, because when you said that, oh, they don't allow you to drink, the first thing that popped into my head is, oh, maybe it's to do with like religion, like, you know, maybe it's a sort of an ancient kind of like Christian kind of custom, like, you know, you don't necessarily drink. Is there an actual reason given for that? Like, oh, you know, we do it because of X, Y, or Z reason, or is it just like these are the rules, deal with it?
There's no official reason given, but what I can tell you from both things that I've seen and heard happen and just my analysis of what's going on, it's because American troops get stupid when they drink, and so they don't trust them. Whereas if you look at the American culture, it's that way too, because, and correct me where I'm wrong, because again, I don't know the drinking ages of every country, but in a lot of the world, the drinking age is much lower than it is in the United States. Well, not much, but lower anyways than it is in the United States, because the relationship with drinking is much different than it is in the United States. And so for the United States people, one, we have people in the military, which is a crazy thing to say out loud, and it's never going to stop me crazy to me, who can die for their country but can't drink a drink legally.
Yeah, it makes no sense.
Yeah. So that's one of it. But then, so because we have such an restrictive relationship with alcohol here in the United States, I think that translates into how we react around it. And we do get dumb around it because we don't get to deal with it and learn how to deal with it at a younger age. You know, there's a reason Italians and other countries that have lower drinking ages aren't as dumb with drinking as Americans are. It's because it's not as a big a deal to them. They're like, oh yeah, we drink all the time, but we control ourselves. We have one or two glasses and then we stop. Whereas Americans go on benders and they're going to drink until colors don't make sense anymore, right?
You mentioned before that you have 4 degrees. Mm-hmm. What are these degrees in? That's nuts. How do you have 4 degrees? You mentioned a bachelor's and a master's. I heard that, but like, what else do you have? What's going on?
I have 2 associates as well. So some people may not consider those real degrees, and they're not completely wrong. but so I have an associate's in visual arts production, associate's in contract management, bachelor's in business, and a master's in business.
God damn. It's got it all. Okay. All right. And tell us about your sort of journey to college and the career that you have now.
Mm-hmm. So for me, college is one of those things that my mom, she didn't go to college. So one of the things that I always look at fondly is my mom's sacrifice for me. My mother had me when she was 18 years old, unwed. And she was planning to join the army herself. But because she had me, she would have had to sign me over to my father. And she's like, I'm not doing that. And so she completely changed the scope of her life for that reason. And so one of the things she told me is that you need to go to college. And she didn't know why. She was like what a lot of those parents who just knew that was a thing that you're supposed to do to have a successful life, but she didn't know exactly what that meant. And neither did I when I first started school. And that's why it took me so long to finish, because I started school when I first joined the military at like 21 or something like that. But I didn't finish my bachelor's until I was 30. And the reason for that is I didn't know what I was actually going to school for. I had no path. I didn't know what school meant. You know what I mean? And so I was just kind of taking general classes because I knew I was supposed to. But then when I started to get a shape of what I wanted my future to be and everything, and I had a career that I believe translated into something, I knew that would translate into getting a business degree, which is a little bit more broad, and I could do a lot of different things with it. So college was always something that I kind of generally wanted to do, but never knew why. And then once I knew why, I actually dedicated myself to getting it done. And then like I said, after I got out of the service, I finished my master's as well to be an expert differentiator between myself and other potential candidates that I might be competing against for other careers, and really just to get the knowledge. My master's is the only thing I feel like I actually learned. My bachelor's and like even the associates, which were just the classes for my bachelor's anyways, I didn't learn anything. It was just a degree. It was just a piece of paper I needed at the end, right? But my master's, I have stuff that I still quote to this day that are from my master's program. And my master's was only 2 years, you know, compared to my bachelor's, which is supposed to be 4, but I did in 9. You know what I mean? So
cool, man. And like off the back of that, you've managed to build a successful financial portfolio, and you used to be a personal finance blogger. So what tips could you give to others who want to become more financially stable?
Oh man, the first thing I'll tell you is personal finance is behavioral. It is not math. People always go, oh, what should I invest in? Where should I put my money? Don't worry about any of that. Can you take a chunk of money every month and do what you need to do with it? Because that's what it comes down to. Where you put it is important, and I'm not going to completely downplay that. But the most important part is being able to consistently do it, because that's where most people fail. Most people don't fail because they buy the wrong stock. Not a lot of people out here putting 100% of their portfolio in Blockbuster stock or something, right? The problem is that people can't consistently do it. And every time they get a raise, they raise their lifestyle and all this type of stuff. So they're not putting money away for a meaningful purpose. And a lot of times that's because they haven't defined what that purpose is. They just know they're supposed to. It's like me when I was in college, right? I knew I was supposed to, but I didn't know what I was doing. People treat money the same way. They're supposed to save it. They're supposed to invest it. They're supposed to blah, 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 blah. But why? Do you want to buy a house? Do you want to retire young? Do you want to retire at a certain age? Like, do you want to retire in a certain location? Why are you doing any of this? And then also consistently doing it is the most important part. It's behavior. So I think the first thing I would tell people when it comes to personal finance is start to define what you're doing. Why are you doing this? What is the entire purpose of you doing these things? And then build goals around that. And then second thing I would say, stop trying to buy individual stocks. Warren Buffett talks about this. The creator of Vanguard, Jack Bogle, talked about this. I believe he's since passed away. But use ETFs and index funds to invest your money, because now you're buying a piece of an entire index, say like the S&P 500, and I'll give a free one out there just to look into. It's the ETF that I myself own and I believe in. It's VOO. It stands for, it's the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF. And what you're doing is you're essentially buying a very tiny piece of all 500 companies in the United States S&P 500. And by doing that, that market always goes up pretty much. And I want to say always, I mean, over any 10-year period of time, it's never ended negatively. It always goes up, right? And I think it averages around 11% over the course of its history, annualized over the course of its history. So those are the first two things. One, figure out why you're doing any of this, and then do it consistently. And then two, buy into ETFs, index funds, make it extremely simple. Do not follow whatever you're seeing Jim Cramer talk about. Do not follow Dave Ramsey. Do not follow any of these people who are telling you to buy a specific stock, because they do this day in and day out, 24 hours a day. So they're buying and trading multiple times. For average people who don't plan to make this a career of just buying and trading constantly, you need to be really simple in what you do and just be consistent. So just buy every month the same ETF or index fund that you personally believe in. VTI is another good one, which is the total stock market ETF. Buy consistently and then leave it alone. You should not be trying to over optimize your strategy until you're a few years down the road and you've proven that you can consistently contribute to it. Because it's behavior at the beginning. Math only comes later. Because if I earn 7%, let's just say 7%, right? I can conceivably make millions of dollars if I put enough in it. But if I'm not putting the money in, it doesn't matter what I'm doing with it.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And thank you for sharing those tips. I'm sure our listeners will appreciate that.
Yep.
To talk to us about your self-analysis mindset. What exactly do you mean by that?
Oh man, that is a huge one for me. I believe that almost anything that you're talking about in this world, whether it's personal finance, whether it's your goals, whether it's being happy, anything, it comes from knowing who you are. Because we have this whole nature versus nurture argument that always comes up, right? Things that you're naturally born with, like that you're going to be this person no matter what you did, and then things that you're taught, like you learn through behavior and things like that or whatever. We don't spend enough time analyzing who we are as people. Why do we do the things that we do? What motivates me? What makes me happy? What makes me sad? A lot of times we just do what our parents did or what we see other people doing, and then we end up in a life that doesn't make us happy. We end up in a job or a relationship or whatever that doesn't make us happy. Knowing who you are should be one of the primary driving factors of your life. And the reason I say that is because then you can design a life that makes sense for you. Maybe you do want to work until you're 70 years old and never retire. Maybe that's for you. Maybe you want to retire at 30 and go travel the world and write a blog or shoot movies or do YouTube, whatever it is. But until you know who you are, you really can't do those things. You're just kind of moving through life without a purpose. And when I say without a purpose, I don't mean like you need to constantly be specifically working on a goal, but you should know what makes you happy and what drives your life. And I don't think a lot of people sit down and actually decide that. So for example, for me, I love people who are kind of the stoic, talk very seldomly type of person. Like Sterling K. Brown, it feels like a guy who I think of who exhibits that. That's never going to be me. I know that I like to talk. I know that I like to have big conversations and be involved in them and everything, right? So you have to really understand who you are and not just what you want to be. Don't try to be Jeff Bezos if you want to be home every day at 5 p.m. You have to really set your life up for who you are as an individual instead of what you think you want to be. And I think one of the things that we really suck at is seeing who we are without judging ourselves, without taking some positive or negative thing from it. You know what I mean? Like just knowing that I like to talk or I like to look at the sunset or something like that. Don't judge that. Just understand it first and then see what it means for you and who you want to be. So self-analysis is central to everything that I tell anybody when it comes to anything. When it comes to personal finance, fitness, being happy, just anything. Understand who you are first. Start there. Have a relationship with yourself and know why you do the things you do and be comfortable in who you are. And then you can really start to build things that mean something to you.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing. Let's continue that with a similar question.
Sure.
What is the biggest life lesson that you've learned so far?
That failure and being wrong are the most important things that you should be doing. We kind of touched on this a little bit earlier in the episode about being wrong and everything like that, right? But so many people don't do things because they're scared of failing that they might as well fail. You're failing by not doing it. You're getting the same end goal, which is not doing whatever it is you're talking about. And so we spend so much time being scared of failure, being scared of being wrong, that we don't try to do things. We don't reach for a bigger life, if you will. We don't do things that really could make us a more impactful human being to ourselves and others, because we're so set into being comfortable. We have to be more comfortable with being somewhat uncomfortable. What I mean by that is that right now, if I said X fact, right? And then 2 episodes later, you have somebody on who's an expert and like, your former guest was an idiot. I wouldn't appreciate the way he said it, but I would appreciate that I now know that I was wrong, right? So I think that's one of the things that we limit ourselves on, is that we need to know that failure is part of the process. I'm not going to be able to lift 300 pounds the first day I go into the gym. We accept that as a fact and we don't judge ourselves for that. But then we expect ourselves to get every question right on the test the first time we take it. Or we expect ourselves to go into a new job being an expert at that field, even though we just started. No, you expect that you're going to have to fail a bunch of times and continue to get better. Now, if you consistently fail on something, that might be a sign, maybe do something else. But we have to really understand that failure is part of the process. It's not the opposite of success. It's on the path to success. So you talk about a lot of these people, again, I tend to be very business-minded. So a lot of the examples I give are business-minded, but this can apply to any field. You take your Jeff Bezos, your Elon Musk, or anybody, Warren Buffett, they fail a million times.
Yeah.
Tons of times. Or if you want to go into more artistic, Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, any of the actors you might like, Christian Bale, oh man, I'm blanking on his name right now. And he's in Michael Caine. That's it. Michael Caine. They fail a million times on their path to success. That's how you get things done.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think the exact same way. So yeah, that's great advice. Thank you for sharing. As we draw things to a close for today, do you have any upcoming projects or maybe some final thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
No upcoming projects. I do, like I said, my podcast comes out every Sunday. You can find me on YouTube at Starting Nowhere. I'm also on all the audio platforms and IG, Facebook, all the different platforms and everything. Just search for Starting Nowhere and you'll find me for sure. But the one thing I want to leave listeners with everything that's going on in the world, with your own personal stress, your personal finance stress, the pandemic, racial tension, politics, religion, and everything like that, try to be earnest in the things that you do. If you have a conversation with somebody, actually go into it trying to earnestly listen. Because so many times we go into conversations just wanting to spit our stuff at people. Christian's not a full person. He's just a sounding board for me to shout things at, right? And I don't mean shout in like a literal sense or anything like that, but we don't do a lot of things in earnest where we're actually trying to have a real experience in that moment. So I think being earnest in the things that we do and being present in the things that we do is a huge piece of how we can get better at pretty much everything that we're talking about here. Because if I'm present in this conversation with Christian, I've learned. I've exchanged ideas. I've exchanged energy. We've gotten better, I hope, as people, and we can take that forward in everything else we do in life. But if I just came on here to plug my podcast or to plug my book, if I had one or whatever, and again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I believe that you need to sell products and those things can help people, but I wouldn't be earnest and I wouldn't get as real of experience from it. So I would say just be earnest in the things that you do and be earnest in things that you don't do. Realize why you're choosing not to do something. Don't go to something just because you have to go. I understand family commitments and things like that, but if you don't want to do stuff, start having a life that doesn't require you to do those things. Why are you continuing to do all these things you don't want to be doing? Be earnest with who you want to be.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Brandon, for sharing and for being such an excellent guest. I really appreciate you being on the show. I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I know our listeners will have enjoyed it as well. So big thank you.
Hey, thank you for having me on, and thank you for scheduling this. I know we talked a few weeks ago, so I wasn't sure if it's ever going to come to fruition. So I really appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you, and I also appreciate your ideas that you put out there. You definitely give me some things to think about and look up after this episode, which is always what I look for in conversations.
Awesome, man. Awesome. And for everyone listening to this episode, I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like, share, and subscribe and all that jazz. If you're listening on Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, leave us a review, leave us a follow. Let me know your thoughts in the reviews. We could really do with some reviews for this podcast. Mm-hmm. I know it might get tedious me plugging every week, but you know what? I've really got to push you guys because you need to be more talkative. You need to let me know. What do you like? What do you dislike? Who do you want to see on the show in the future? And what kind of topics do you want to hear in the future? Let me know. I'm always willing to listen. And as always, thank you so much for listening to the Christian Reeve Podcast. And until next time, peace out, one love. I'll see you in the next one.